Things seem to be slowing down a little bit. So, uh, before I get started introducing John, let me welcome you all to this webinar. Sarah and I conduct or host webinars like this once a month, and we are delighted today to be joined by Jon Ippolito. A little bit of bookkeeping before I introduce John. We are going to send out a link to the recording of this webinar as well as notes and links. John has a lot of resources that he wants to share. Those will be in a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this webinar, whether you actually make the Zoom meeting or not. I know we sometimes have people signing up from the other side of the globe who attend that way. So with no further ado, let me introduce John. So Jon Ippolito is an artist, writer, and curator who teaches new media and digital curation at the University of Maine. He is the winner of Tiffany, Lannan, American Foundation, and Thoma awards, and is co-founder of the Variable Media Network for preserving new media and art, and also University of Maine's digital curation and just-in-time learning programs. His AI resources for educators include the Learning with AI toolkit, the AI Impact Risk Framework, and the What Uses More Footprint Calculator. And that's the thing that really got us excited about bringing John here today. We've used it, we've shared it with other people, it's pretty cool. So John has given over 200 presentations, co-authored the books At the Edge of Art and Recollection, Art, New Media, and Social Memory, and has published 90 chapters and articles in periodicals from Artforum to the Washington Post. His AI focus is creators, writers, programmers, and media makers, and how the technical, aesthetic, and legal ramifications of generative AI empower and frustrate them. So, with no further ado, please take it, John.
Thanks, Ben. I assume everyone can hear me okay. So excited to join Sarah and Ben because I've been sort of idols of theirs or groupies, as it were, and really appreciated all the experiments they've shared in a very open way in the past with the community, both devoted to things, digital curation, like libraries and museums and archival workflows, as well as like anyone who deals with digital collections or material. So glad to be here. Let's jump in. I'm going to start by acknowledging that there's a lot of risks that I won't talk about today that have to do with AI. This is part of the impact risk framework at AIimpactrisk.org. You can read up about all the different ways that we might be concerned about AI, but I'm only going to focus on one today, which is climate, right? So what's the impact of AI on the environment? Super contentious topic, which is probably why we've got 200 people here today. Some disclaimers. I'm going to assume you're basically familiar with AI and some aspects of its environmental impact. This is not going to be like a primer on like how data centers work. This is going to be like getting into the weeds of like where are people making claims that might or might not be true, and how does that affect what we do and how we can improve these systems for the future. It's a rapidly evolving field. What I say today might be wrong in 6 months. You'll see that I'm maintaining a compendium of research that I try to keep updated, but it is a challenge. And so take that with a grain of salt. Also, data is really scarce and unreliable often. So you get contradictory sources and not many sources that are actually from the horse's mouth. That is industry or peer-reviewed studies that have access to data centers in places where AI companies are building models. Finally, I'm not an environmental scientist. I have a background in physics, and this is an area of research for me. But I lean on the shoulders of people who have done a lot of these studies, and mostly what I'm doing is sort of dimensional analysis and other ways of correlating things that I read. I will say that the reason I got into this was frustration at how the news about AI and its footprint are being reported. Not because I feel like, oh, AI is terrible and it's ruining the world, or no, AI's impact is not to be worried about. I'm not one of those people. It's more that I found people talking past each other this person's talking about, oh, so many joules, and this person's talking about so many kilowatts, and this person's talking about micro hamburgers. And like, there was no way for me to figure out who was right unless I came up with a consistent sort of units to compare things with. So that's a lot of what I'll try to do today. I'm going to focus on some part of the equation here, which we call scope one emissions. That's what happens in the actual data centers where AI is trained and your inferences, like your queries, get processed. When you say, like, write me a birthday card for my niece, and you put in ChatGPT, it's happening at scope one. But there are impacts that are outside of that. So I will talk a little bit about scope two, which is like where the electricity is generated that goes to these data centers. I won't talk so much about scope three, but it is important. And it affects things like e-waste, like both how old CPUs go into landfills, often in the third world, and are pried apart by poor people looking for valuable rare earth metals they can resell. But also the sort of and I should say that one of the least reported on aspects of this is that GPUs have a really short half-life when they're operating under the loads in data centers for AI. They're burning really hot. Estimates run between 1 and 3 years. I mean, that's crazy. That's shorter than your laptop by a factor of, I don't know, 5 or something like that, right? So you have to realize that every one of these data centers that's being built has like a 3-year half-life before they have to replace the parts. Something I feel is very underreported. Also, there's just the sort of increased activity, the sort of boosters of AI we'll talk about. We're going to get, 5% or 10% increase in GDP every year. That means more people flying, more people doing things in the economy, and that tends to impact the overall emissions. We saw during COVID that all decreased and emissions also decreased. So that's all part of scope three. Again, won't be focusing on that today. So a quick quiz. We don't have a sort of poll set up. So if you could just post your thoughts in the chat. What do you think uses more energy and water? Writing a paragraph of AI text, charging your cell phone, or Zooming for an hour with 10 people? And we'll assume that's not today, 200 people, most of which are not using their video, but 10 people using full frame video. So give it a shot. I want to see in the text what you guys have to say about what you think is the most kind of greedy of those three activities.
John, the consensus so far, about 90% of people are saying Zooming
There
takes
is a
this.
lot of Zooming.
I'd say that the remainder is maybe, let's say, 7% AI and 3% charging a phone. Some people specifically cite your tool as a rationale for their answer.
That's cheating. All right. Well, you're all wrong because the answer is it depends. And I hate this answer, but we'll get into the weeds of why this is true. So it depends on the scenario. And if you play around with the tool long enough, you can see that if you have the best case scenario for AI, or let's say then it's only like 7 watt hours. And by watt hours, that's a fancy way of saying like a light bulb minute. Like a traditional light bulb that goes on for a minute, like a 60-watt bulb is a watt hour. So if you ran your old grandma's incandescent bulb for a minute, 7 minutes, that'd be the same as a paragraph of AI text, and that's that's one of the things that makes it sort of perhaps worrisome until you realize that it depends on the conditions of everything else, right? So charging your cell phone 20 light bulb minutes, Zooming 2,000, but if we switch so that instead of using solar power, like you're in California, and it's the winter, I don't know, Northern California, Marin County or something like that. Now you're switching so that you're using coal. You're in West Virginia. That's your local power production. That's scope 2, as I mentioned. You're using a reasoning model that takes a lot more tokens, deep reasoning or deep research, or a mode in which there's chain of thought, that kind of thing. And if you have a multi-step, prompt where you're not just doing a one shot, but you're like, oh, I'm going to revise this, email over 10 different prompts or something like that in the summertime, it can be as much as 6,000 minutes of a light bulb. On the other hand, it all depends also if you've got zooming and you're doing that in the coal powered plant in the summer, then you got 12,000, which is twice as much as the worst case scenario for the paragraph of AI text. So the point of this sort of exercise is just to show that it's really misleading to give single values for the amount of energy or water used by a prompt, say. And it so much depends on those contexts that this is a big feature of what uses more app, which again we'll look at later. But for those of you who cheated by using it in advance, that was clever. There's champions and critics of AI, as you know, and most of the talks I've seen about the environment fall into one camp. People are, hey, don't worry about it. It's really insignificant compared to all these other things, and it's going to solve climate change. Or they're, no, this is the apocalypse. You don't realize how much damage it's doing, and we really need to stop this all right now. I'm going to try to find a middle path, by which I mean I'm not like averaging the two sides. I think some sides are right about some things and some about others. But just to do my best to be sort of nonpartisan in reflecting the research and calculations I've done. So I think so. I'm going to go through a series of about a half dozen misleading claims that I personally don't believe. You might agree with them. I don't. And so this is both a way of me sort of picking at some of the research and the headlines and sort of analyzing them so that we know what we can trust, and also sort of laying out my position based on what I've seen. And feel free to disagree with me. I would love to see questions or kind of dissent in the comments. First claim, LLMs are parrots. I don't believe that. I think they are stochastic, but stochastic things can generate new results. And this might be unfamiliar concept to those of you who just think, well, probabilities are just sort of, reflections of averages. But the special kind of intensely recursive averaging that transformer models do can generate new stuff. And, an example I would give that's kind of trivial is like if you have a bunch of set of numbers, 3 and 7 and 1 and 9, the average of those numbers can be a number that isn't in the set. Like 5 maybe isn't in that original math set, but it's new. It's new in the sense that it wasn't discovered until you averaged all those numbers. Now you might say, well, that's stupid. Like we all know what the integers are. But if you get into a multidimensional space, and we're talking about tens of thousands of dimensions, at least in these embeddings, then you can discover a point somehow that was in there that might not have been present before, or at least known before. And so what does this math have to do with like energy and stuff? Well, we can surface some insights. So for example, the AI models like AlphaFold are predicting drugs that we haven't predicted before. It's technically not the same as a large language model. It's more narrow use, has much lower environmental footprint, but it is surfacing some info that we didn't know before. Ben and Sarah have done an awesome job of kind of going through and saying like, hey, can AI help with all these tasks that most, cultural heritage organizations or collecting institutions have to do? And, my memory is that there's some of these tasks on this list that it's actually been quite helpful for. Things where you're actually improving access and discovering things, surfacing insights that weren't there from, would have been very hard and labor intensive for a human to do. So, some people are like, AI is just snake oil. I don't agree with that. I think it has its functions. So that's my first sort of, thing where I might disagree from some of the sort of the doomers or the sort of naysayers about the value of AI. On the other hand, we have the boosters claim that AI's impact is a known quantity, and we've got a sense of its environmental impact, and it's not that high. Most recently, I heard this from Kevin Roos, the New York Times columnist on the Artforum podcast, who said, well, we don't have to worry anymore about what's going on with AI's footprint because, these reports have come out that tell us the answer. I think that's wrong. The industry has no incentive to share data. And so the data we have is super sparse. We have got a couple of reports from the last couple of years on, for example, water usage. They vary dramatically, and they don't tell us the context of how it was measured. And as you know, from my little quiz there, it really depends. The context matters a lot, right? So this is a statistic, a survey of 1,000 companies, right, that are in the AI space. 97% don't measure their footprint. Like there's no one in the data centers with a meter saying, "Oh, how much electricity are we using?" Hey, let's put a little valve in and sense the water coming into the cooling tank. No one's doing that, right? So it's impossible for us to have a known quantity without measurement. And so when I am giving you figures today, it's based on, sort of whatever I can pull from whatever studies have been done. So that's another claim that I think is really misleading. Another misleading claim. This is a claim made by the doomers that there's a massive amount of water per prompt. We're just, basically pouring out bathtubs of water every time we hit ChatGPT. Most notably from this headline in the Washington Post, a bottle of water per email. So I think this is an overstatement. A bottle of water per email assumes, having dug into the research by a team at UC Riverside and Austin who did the original paper, which is somewhat misleadingly condensed in this headline, we're talking about 10 to 50 medium-length ChatGPT queries per email. So I don't know about you guys, but I would never put 50 prompts to write an email. I might ask one to make it more tactful if I'm really pissed off at my boss or something. But that's a lot of prompts. They also assumed a location with poor water usage efficiency. So as you know, if you've looked at the What Uses More app, where you are, varies, it changes the impact of the water and energy you're going to use. If you're in California and you've got, solar power, then that's great. You're going to have less climate impact than if you're in West Virginia using coal. And the same is true for the water usage. And they happen to pick Washington State, which is 5 or more times more inefficient in terms of water usage than most other US states. They assumed no improvement in data center efficiency since 2020. Efficiency per prompt we're talking here. So yeah, there's more data centers, but presumably they're also gotten more efficient. That is in the industry's interest to make things more efficient. All right, here's a misleading claim. I think is misleading on the booster side, that there's negligible water for prompts. So I said it's not true that there's a massive water per prompt, and it's also not true that it's negligible. So everybody points to this paper from Google from 2025, in which they measured they declare the amount of water and energy for a quote median prompt for Gemini, and it's 0.26 milliliters, which is like a drop or a couple of drops. It's not even a teaspoon. So everybody's like, oh, there we know now that the actual water is not a bottle. You're not pouring out a liter every time you write an email. It's like a couple drops. Well, I think that's wrong. Mistral, the other AI company that actually did an actual report that they shared with the public, came up with 45 milliliters, not 0.26, and that's in the same year. So how come those numbers are so different? That's literally 100 times difference in the amount of water reported. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with Google's reporting of a median query. And those of you math nerds out there know there's a difference between the mean average and the median average, right? So the mean would be like an average over all the sort of all the prompts and some prompts, like I said, take a lot of energy and some take a little energy. But the median is sort of like the middle where it's not the values that are considered so much as the frequency. And you can bias the median by having a lot of one example of something in a data set. And my gut here is that back in 2025 anyway, there were a lot of Gemini queries that are building code, right? Now, again, this is sort of a gut feeling. I don't have any evidence for this, and I could be a little shaky here, but when back then, instead of using agents, there wasn't Claude Code and that sort of agentic workflow as much. People would just use code to autocomplete. So you're in VS Code or some code editor, and you're typing tab every time it says, do you want to make this a div? Do you want to make this JavaScript method or whatever? And you're like, yeah, that sounds good. Tab, tab, tab. Those are, half a dozen tokens per shot, right? So code, as we know from other studies, has a very low impact on the environment compared to generating text, or certainly compared to generating things like media, like music and video and images. So if the thing is biased toward code prompts, you're going to get a very low answer when you look for the median. Another thing that I think is misleading here is the type of water. You actually have to use municipal water for most cooling systems of data centers. And municipal water is, that's what you drink. It's not the same as what goes into a farm. It's not the same that irrigates the soybean fields. It's got to be, basically, purified and sanitized and conditioned after you use it. And it requires this whole build out of local, kind of infrastructure. So I think that means that the impact of the water used by prompts is more than just saying like, just a particular number might mean. And finally, 2/3 of these data centers are being built in drought areas, like places like Arizona, Nevada, even parts of Africa and South America where water is scarce. So this is a map of like some of the aerial views of some of the places for these most prominent data centers, and just look at that. It's barely any green, right? This is where you're choosing to put data centers. Well, there's some financial logic to it having to do with access to solar power, big areas of land, political, kind of lack of permitting and so forth. But it has a much better impact than just saying like the water use is negligible. Another misleading claim, I think, is to say that the electricity is negligible. Again, people point to the same Google paper of 0.24 watts per which is watt hours is essentially light bulb minutes. So 0.24 light bulb minutes of energy. I think that's wrong. The results are going to vary dramatically, like I said. So you get a 2 times factor, according to my study, based on where the local energy source is coming from. You get a 3 times factor based on the local climate. Is it a cold place or is it a warm place? Obviously going to need more, cooling, and that requires more energy if you're in a warm place. The number of prompts, you can have up to 10 prompts, as we've seen, to generate an email. And the prompt complexity has a factor of 30, which is crazy. But that's a very recent study that I had to bump up that number because people are finding that chain of thought and reasoning models really use a ton of tokens. Another misleading claim, I think, is that a low per query footprint is the same as low impact. I don't agree with that. I think that just because someone says, like, let's say Google is right. Oh, actually it is, only a few drops of water per query. Well, that's like insignificant compared to all the other things that we do. I think that we have to remember some mitigating factors, like the rise of agents, right? So we might be just like, every couple of days I tweak an email with ChatGPT. Well, here's a story from LinkedIn I saw. One user consumed 5 million tokens in like half a day while he was sleeping, just running various Claude Code agents on a machine. So, and you may have heard stories of like people at OpenAI and other companies kind of agent maxing, where they're trying to hit this leaderboard of like who can use the most agents. I mean, that's insane, right? So that many tokens by one user who's not even at their computer, the rise of agents could blow the per query footprint out of the water, in the sense that it's the volume now, not the per query number, that counts. There's also the replacement fallacy, and this is my term for a concept Rebecca Yeager has described, of people often compare a query to eating a hamburger or flying across the country or something. And those are important, comparisons. I do think those are valuable, but we have to remember that the assumption, the implied assumption, is that you would do one without doing the other. That is, instead of using AI, I am going to, eat a hamburger, or vice versa. Well, your employee still has to eat lunch and drive to work, even if they're not going to use AI or are going to use AI at their workplace. So I think that is something we have to question when you compare. That it makes me hesitant to put too much faith into comparing AI tasks to non-digital tasks. Finally, local impacts can far exceed global averages. We saw that already with the water consumption, right? That's really important to realize, that the impacts of data centers have numerous ways of impacting a community that might not be represented by just some number of environmental footprint per quant. And here's my most sort of provocative comment for today, I think, which is that AI may be a Trojan horse to build data centers for non-AI uses. I'm sure this is going to freak out some people, but think about it. In the companies that are investing in data centers today, you have Google, for which AI is still a pretty tiny fraction of its income, right? But it does have it's one of the three biggest players in the AI space. But you also have Meta, right? The people making Facebook. You have Amazon, the folks who are, running, an e-commerce giant, right? They're not known for AI. It's a very small part of their enterprise. What are they known for? They're known for data mining. They're known for crunching numbers to serve you ads. Add to that the fact that in the last couple years, the amount of energy consumption in data centers in the US, I believe that's the only number we have information for, has gone from 15% to 20%. So you hear all this, hype about we're building these data centers because we're going to cure cancer with AI. But what's the other 80% being used for? Crypto and data mining. But it's much harder to sell your town council on building, a Walmart-sized, factory that's going to be noisy and hot and disrupt wildlife corridors and change zoning laws and so forth. If you tell people it's for being able to target you ads for Ozempic and Huggies on Facebook, they're not going to buy it. So instead, we offer this shiny vision of a future, where everything's made better by AI. Anyway, that's my take, and I'm sticking to it. You can rail me on that in the comments. Okay, another misleading claim. This is my last one, I think. Focusing on AI distracts from serious impacts. And I think this is a principled stance in some ways. People like Andy Masley say, like, hey, there's so much more that's important. I myself did a calculation that said, you could basically write 100 books with AI for the same impact of flying one way from New York to LA, right? So these are real numbers here. But I think there are still reasons why we should focus on AI's impact, and it's not just a distraction. And one of them is simply that look at past technologies, right? Look at what we did with social media. We let it fester for 15 years, right? YouTube's invented in 2005, right? We let these things sort of have an impact on our society. And only recently have we begun to think about regulating them, right? There was a big court case you might have seen recently about, calling social media companies to task for the negative social consequences they've had. And those data were there. We just didn't pay attention to them. So I think that having waited too long in previous technological sort of, disruptions, AI offers us a chance to get it right, to model better behavior for our students and for the future of like how we should tackle technology when it first comes down the pike. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and see if there are questions so far. I hope I've, at least provoked some of you, if not pissed you off with these suggestions, and very interested to hear from anyone out there with comments or questions.
There are some absolutely amazing conversations going on in the thread, in the chat, but I was wondering whether you could give us a brief primer on the difference between consumptive water use and non-consumptive water use, because it seems clear that circulating things has one use, and things that involve evaporation is another, and how does that play with municipal water versus irrigation water versus salt water or things like that? You're saying this is all more complicated, and wow, it definitely seems like that's the case.
Wow. Yeah, definitely not my area of expertise. I'll punt a little bit, except to say that this distinction works out in the difference. Okay, very short version. My understanding is that most plants today, most data centers have two loops, right? So you have a loop of cooling water that goes through and gets hot, and then that goes out and there's a sort of transfer to a second loop where it warms up the second water, batch of water by going through a pipe with water around it. And so that first water can go back in and cool the data center, the hot GPUs again. What happens to that, kind of second batch of water? Well, it's typically let out to evaporation tanks where essentially that water goes away, right? It goes into the atmosphere. And you can say like, well, but it's going to rain back and come down the mountain and go back in the public reservoir, but it's treated water, right? It's water that we have municipal infrastructure to make potable, so we can drink it, right? It comes out of our faucet. And so people have been looking at different models for like, how can we change that so that there's a closed loop water solution? Or, in one of the most extreme ones, Microsoft created a project Natick where they put a data center underwater in the ocean. And like, hey, let's have people go down there and work. And, it lasted a couple of years and they did some sort of, virtual signaling projects with it. I don't think it was super practical. This is also, as an aside, the reason that so many of these projects are one of the reasons that they tend to be positioned in the Southwest or in desert areas, because there's less corrosion. There isn't the same kind of humidity and so forth that can lead to pipe corrosion. But of course, there you have drought-stricken areas that are more likely to be underwater pressure or under pressure of not having enough water, I should say. Let's see. Then you have data centers in space, which I think is really fanciful. Let's just say that right now, I don't know enough to evaluate the new models that are coming out. I think there are places like Microsoft where they're trying to be more green and more efficient with water use. I would say water use is probably less of a concern for me than energy use, but again, it totally depends on the context. Some of these places that are, very dry, where citizens already don't have the money for building out municipal water, I think are really in danger from the proliferation of data centers.
Okay, we've got another. I assume you've got more to present, and we're just taking a little break here. But
Yeah.
I did want to see if I could get you to address a couple of other questions that are kind of fundamental definitions. And one of them I looked at and I said, oh, well, obviously, and then I realized I did not have an answer, which is, what is a token? We're talking about all these things in units per token or 1,000 tokens. In the year of our Lord 2026, what does a token mean
What is a
nowadays?
token? Yeah, it's a good question. So I, again, apologize. I tried to give a disclaimer at the beginning that I wasn't going to go through, all the details, but I'm happy to answer them as they come up. So token is essentially a word. Technically, it's part of a word. So if you have like the word collaborate, it might be collab, and then Asian or something like that would be the second part of the word. You could think of them as stems for those of you linguists out there. Essentially, the reason tokens matter is that they are the atom of prediction. So when you start typing into your phone and it auto completes a sentence for you, it's basing it on the previous words that were in the sequence. And why this matters is that when word prediction first came out, it would only look back to the previous word or parts of a word, right? And they would do this by comparing, let's say, you in modern languages or modern language models, you're basically downloading the entire internet pretty much, and then you're just looking through texts and comparing word correlations, like this word, what was the most common word that appeared next to it? You create a bunch of word pairs and then you do statistics on them so that you say, well, the word, if I had a sentence that started with once upon a time there was and hamburger is going to be very unlikely to be the next word in the sequence compared to, say, princess or king or knight or whatever. And so these language models are comparing sequences of tokens like this and constructing tables that have probabilities next to each pair. So again, there was a princess might be, a 20% chance of being the next word. King might be, 10%, queen might be 12%, hamburger might be 0.0003%. And you can think of the rise of sophistication of models past the sort of old, school, like auto predict on your phone, as getting more and more tokens into the mix, reaching back further and further into the history to give more and more context to what the next word would be. And it's not just a matter of context window, although that's very important. We're now up to 1 million tokens in some of the more sophisticated models, but also the way that those things relate to each other. Like, oh, you and I, if we took English class, would be like, that's an adjective applying to a noun, and this is a prepositional phrase and whatnot. They're doing that in a sort of automated way using a technology called attention, which in essence is this kind of recursive sort of testing to see which tokens matter the most. So tokens are super important, but they are just the atom of word prediction.
Fantastic. I think that's all of the kind of basics that came up.
Okay. Maybe I'll go forward and then we'll see if there's time at the end for
Perfect.
more questions because I'd love to have some more.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to share again. And I think, okay, you should see the map of pending and enacted social media legislation. See a graph and a map. You guys see that? Okay. So let's talk about some sort of new things I've researched that have to do specifically with the audience that's from the page, collecting institutions, cultural heritage, that sort of thing. So these are some tasks, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to look at these non-AI comparisons that are digital tasks, we shouldn't just look at like scrolling, TikTok or watching Netflix. Those are kind of frivolous things. What about things we actually have to do? Right. And some of us do this just automatically as part of our lives. And some of us do this as part of work, right? We get paid to do this stuff. And people say, why haven't you done this? So the good news is that most of these, according to my initial calculations, are pretty low energy usage, right? And presumably similar low and sometimes no water usage. So digitizing a photo takes about a light bulb minute. And this makes sense if you think about it, because if you've ever like put a photograph down on one of those scanners, there's like a light bulb underneath and it runs for about a minute. So kind of logical, right? That's a very low amount of energy compared to, say, charging your smartphone is 20 of those. And an AI paragraph, depending on, how much juice you put in there, could be 3 of those up to, 50 of those. Storing a gigabyte in the cloud. You got that photo, you've now digitized it, you're going to put it up to AWS or iCloud or Google Photos or whatever, right? What's that going to eat? Well, I'm guessing about 5. So, again, it varies, but the storing without data mining, no crypto or no, none of that stuff. But if you're just storing your photos up there, oh, I'm using the cloud. That's a lot of energy. Not that much if it's in cold storage and you're not accessing it all the time. That's what my calculations suggest. Migrating a video. So I wanted to find something that was like, okay, I'm not going to use AI, but I'm going to use something that's like pretty intensive, right? So I'm going to convert a video from one format to another, right? And those of us in museums and so forth, we have to do that from time to time. You might even have to do that if you work in social media or marketing or whatever. Every time you post a video to YouTube, it makes like, I don't know, a half dozen different formats for different devices and so forth. So QuickTime is a really kind of somewhat clunky, big format, a little older. AV1 is like a cool, hip, up to the minute, in my opinion, one of the best, most efficient codecs available today. So what is that? 25 light bulb minutes, not a ton, again. It depends on where you do it. If you do it on your local machine, it is actually a little bit better than doing it in the cloud. But if you do it with like a GPU setup that's very efficient, it'll actually be less than that. So again, when I look at this based on my initial research, I'm not worried. This is not something that bugs me, and it's nowhere near the comparison of many of the more intensive AI tasks. Right? Once we get into the realm of video and so forth, you can get into very high numbers here. So yeah. So what can we do about these potential spiraling effects? I like Wikipedia. I love Wikipedia. It's great. Use Wikipedia. If you're asking for the capital of a country, don't ask ChatGPT. Just go to Wikipedia. It's great. And it's still made by humans. Google something with -AI. It used to be that you could curse. You could say, like, what's the fucking capital of France? And it wouldn't use AI to give you an answer. That doesn't seem to work anymore, sadly. So we have to type -AI in the search query. If you use something like ChatGPT, click temporary chat, right? That doesn't mean it won't be stored, but it's supposed to be stored for only 30 days. There's some question about whether that's really true. But, that means also they're not going to, or in addition to setting the temporary, set it not to train on your data. Because again, the training of the process is part of what is the impact of these large language models. Training accounts for, very roughly 30% of the overall impact, although the amount of energy used for inference is going up with all these agents. My most common prompt is be concise. I add that to like the end of every prompt, especially like it depends. Claude tends to be pretty concise, but in my experience, ChatGPT will just go on with like multiple summaries of the same damn thing. Those are super simple things you could do yourself. But as we know from environmental science, it's really many of the solutions have to happen on a collective level. We got to convince companies and governments. So what can we do about that? So collective solutions include pressing for regulation. Like I said, I think we have the opportunity to get ahead of things. LD 912 is a Maine law that restricts the amount of energy from a local provider to go to a data center to 25% of that output. And many observers believe that was responsible for the canceling of a data center in Millinocket. Press for data center transparency. Okay, so even if you're not working at a government level, you can work at a private citizen level. And my colleague, just going to open this LinkedIn post, which I will send you also, or Sarah will send a link to. Jolene Blay at the University of Maine. We used to work in a mill when she was young in Lewiston, Maine, and a company came in and said, we're going to take this over and make it into a data center. And she essentially defeated this, and the town council voted unanimously against it, her and other kind of Mainers. And she has a 5-step program here for how to do that for your own local community. So that's something else you can do. And a lot of it is just not saying like, we don't want this. It's like saying, what is this? Who's behind this? What are going to be the effects and so forth? Tools for transparency and accountability, we can build those. And that's something that I've been especially interested in. Some of you know I've worked on that. So here are some of the tools that I recommend. What uses more? Of course, this is something that I've worked on. I also want to make sure that you know that these sources are out there. Like, I'm not hiding the data. I'm putting it in a Google Sheet anyone can use. And I update this sheet and the tool always runs off this sheet, right? So it's not running on some canned info. It's literally pulled from here. I've got all my measurements. I've got the conversions. I've got the sources. You can go look them up. You can see where I made conclusions and why, and you can disagree with me, right? So steal my data, make it better if you can. There's a cool VS Code for those of you coders called Code Carbon that it's an extension that tracks your carbon usage as you're coding. That's pretty neat. Your digital life is a neat thing by Joel Glad. And what's cool about that is that you can ask students or yourself, you can sort of like, count how many text prompts you had in a given week or whatever, and then see your impacts. And the other cool thing I really like about this, apart from I love the layout and the idea, is it's actually based on the what uses more data. It pulls from that same spreadsheet. So we can kind of collaborate, right, on these tools. DPC has another one for digital curation practices. And one that I am really happy to be working on is a prototype I'm going to show now called Collaborate, that uses AI to, it uses the data about footprint to insert it right into your chat. And just checking to see if we might have anybody from the Collaborate team that would be willing to.
Yeah, we're here, John. Me and Ethan, one of the student developers, is here too. Hi, everybody.
Super. All right. So this is Greg Nelson. He's the lead for this project along with a bunch of students. And I'm very excited to have them demo some of their work if I can find the interface. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we'll focus on the environmental impact kind of draft kind of beta features that we're building into this. So what Collaborate is it's kind of like it's a system that's designed for people to use AI in a more social and reflective way. So it's designed to be a lot more like Slack kind of by default. So like the default is that you can just send messages to other people in your groups and communities. And then, oh, by the way, if you want to send a message to AI and get a response from AI, you can too. So that's kind of the default design of this. And then John is, you can see here, this is just a thread in the development server that John is running from when we were building this together. So John has like a little at AI, what is the capital of France? And then, that prompted Claude Sonnet, and it's, you can see some details of the execution there. You can open that up, John, if you want. So you can see exactly what was sent to the AI. So those are all, things in the message there. In this particular case, the AI was configured to have like details from the chat transcript and other things like that. And then it sends and ultimately creates an output. So you can go ahead and close the execution details there, John. So we've got numbers of tokens, right? And so we have some estimates from John's spreadsheet and research about how much do different tokens cost, and also for different models. So because we have AI queries in the system here, we know what model was used. We get information back from the API providers about the tokens that they used. And then we can use that to estimate the impact of the different tokens. So John, you can go ahead and open up the settings and then show the, so we've also got, anyways, let's go through the next one. Yeah, good job, John. So John then made a query with Opus. Claude Opus is kind of their higher end model that's more expensive. So it's more capable and more expensive. And this particular query was a bit longer. And so it also searched the internet. AI systems, etc. will do that too. And so it used up a lot more tokens, basically. So that's like 10,000 tokens. And then Opus tokens are also more expensive because the Opus model itself is bigger. So when it processes a token, it uses more kind of data center footprint. So John, do you think we should just show the analytics part?
Yeah.
Great. All right. Here we go. So what this has done is just taken John's, those two queries in the channel. It's basically looked up the information from John's spreadsheet there and estimated the resource kind of footprint of the two AI queries that John made. And so, there's lots of ways to estimate these things. These are just estimates, right? Because there's a lot of things are not just reported by companies, like John was saying. So John, you can zoom out on the page a little bit to see the rest of it, or you can make the window big. Since you have a big laptop.
I may have to, I'm not sure if I can actually do that. Oh.
Yeah,
can you see the
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there you go. Yep. Okay. So you can zoom in a little bit more, John, because we can still see the rest of the interface. There we go. Cool. This is in development, as we can see. There's a little scrolling bug on this web page, but we've got the idea. It's more important what the idea is. You can also click like the bar chart thing. If you don't like circle charts, you can see the same kind of thing. So it's added these up. We can see that the Opus query in this energy by model use is a lot higher than the Sonnet one, both because it uses fewer tokens and because the impact of the model itself is that big. Then we're doing the same kind of rough digital equivalent calculations that John's tool does. And then we've also tried to add, and this is still kind of in process and we can talk about this and there's more complexity to it. We're also trying to add like a behavior change element, which is saying, okay, if you've got this much AI research use, what are some things that you could do or avoid doing to help offset some of that use? And all of these, the text there is like draft text, but what we do is we try to take 150% of the AI impact and then suggest an activity that would offset 150% of it, both because there's an error probably in the estimates. And in principle, we would like kind of the net of this thing to be a lower impact. So if you're using AI and you're following recommendations to change your behavior, hopefully the overall impact you'd have is less. Again, having one thing offset the other is a complicated ethical and other discussion and calculations. But at least the idea that we should be, we shouldn't just tell people, oh, this is the impact. Now what can you do to kind of reduce your impact is, I think, the core idea there. So yeah, so that's the basic stuff that we've got here. And it's an example of what we hope, these future AI systems that we're building could look like that integrate some of these concerns into them instead of just saying, well, you should think about that when you use AI, or maybe don't use it as much. We need to kind of go beyond that to make things more transparent. Is that good, John?
That's great. And
Excellent.
Here's a little
thank you, everyone.
Some of the students working with Greg on this amazing team that he's got. So if we want, we could just field questions for the last couple minutes, but also if you feel like a little challenge here, go to whatusesmore.com. It's with hyphens, what-uses-more.com. Someone can put it in the chat and see if you can find equivalences. So this is a game I often give students of like pick an AI thing and a non-AI thing and try to make them the same height, the two little bar charts of water and energy. And, can you find how many AI paragraphs are equivalent to 30 minutes of scrolling TikTok, or how many lines of code or an hour of Zoom, that kind of thing. But in the meantime, we can also just sort of share any questions and Greg, if you want to stick around, it'd be great.
Yeah,
I'm
I'll
sure
stick
some people
around.
might
I'll
have,
definitely stick around. Yep.
may have
Ethan's
questions
also
on your
here,
tool as well.
and if yeah.
Yeah, and also if there's student members of your team, it'd be lovely to hear from them too.
Yeah, and also I put my email address in the chat. If you're interested in platforms like Collaborate or something, feel free to email me. We'll be releasing it at some probably a soon point. So thank you.
Yes, and probably for the first time, we will be including the chat transcript in our follow-up email because the discussions there have been so fantastic. So the first question that we have for the team, there's all this enthusiasm about this amazing analytical tool. And so the question for Greg, John, and the team that's probably most frequently asked is, will this be generally available? Like I know when we were talking beforehand, this is the paint's kind of still wet on this this particular system. But what are your plans for making it accessible to more people? Is it something we're going to have to download and install ourselves, or will it be running on a server somewhere? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so definitely. So we Collaborate is a research project, and at the same time, I think we all know that we just need better the tools from AI system providers. They can have lots of good usability features, but there's certain types of interest or certain priorities of features that are just different when we have different kind of values. So we do eventually want to release Collaborate. I would say that be able to like either run on some of the servers that we have. There's different like privacy and security things, obviously, but we should be releasing, I would say, the system in the next several months in some kind of capacity that you can bring some API keys for whatever group or organization that you make, because we obviously can't pay for everyone's AI use, unlike various large billion-dollar funded companies out there that are helping supplement API costs at the moment. But I appreciate your comment, and also very much welcoming of steering and changing the design of that system. I think we all need to have a say in a civic sense, as a sense of communities of what are the tools that we use, how can we make them better, and how can they express our needs and help us bring us together instead of putting us into like little secret AI cubicles. So that is kind of the root goal of that. And it is meant to be an educational platform. Great. Thanks for your question. Thanks for your enthusiasm. Send me an email. Flood my email box. Oh no. Actually, if you're going to just say, add this tag, what is this event?
From the page.
From the page. Just include from the page somewhere in your email message. I think my email inbox is about to become somewhat full. So thank you very much. Ethan, do you want to add anything about what excites you about this project or thing you'd like to share with the community here?
I just think that what's particularly exciting about what we're building with Collaborate is I think it represents almost like a democratization of what people are trying to get out of their AI use. And I think it's really cool and really clear from all of the people who have come to this and have taken time to learn about that there's interest in being more mindful about how you're using AI and how you can use it as a tool and how you can use it while still being able to learn from the people around you and to have the human element that makes people the wonderful creatures that they are. So I'm honored to be able to work on the platform that's bringing that to people's hands, and I love seeing the interest that there is for it.
Well, we've got one of our first questions. Anuj Gupta at University of South Florida asks whether if everyone uses small models on their laptops instead of using presumably these big commercial cloud models, is that better overall, even when done at scale, or does it end up being the same as running large models in the cloud? Which I think this is a great question, and I have no idea what the answer is.
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of controversy over that. And, I think that one of the things that there's a lot of reasons I would like to see more local models run on laptops. So it's hard for me to distinguish the environmental reasons from the privacy reasons and control and secure, kind of agency reasons. But, the economies of scale that you get by putting a lot of GPUs together in a data center, in my mind, may be offset by the fact that, you've got to communicate these things over long distances over the internet, as opposed to right there on your fingertips. And you have to deal with like the enormous amount of heat that's produced by having all these systems together. add to that the effects, the local effects of data centers that go beyond the obvious, like energy and water usage. For example, the ways that you're destroying wildlife corridors, or you're changing zoning laws so that people no longer are in residential communities. Now it's suddenly industrial. Or that, you wonder why these things are always one story. Like, oh, why don't they build it like a skyscraper that's full of data centers, right? Well, the reason is they're freaking heavy as hell. And so you actually can't build floors that are strong enough to hold the racks. And finally, the fact that we're talking about, chips that have a lifespan of 1 to 3 years, according to industry estimates. I mean, that all argues to me that we should be doing a lot more on our laptops.
Fascinating. Looking for other questions. One of the ones that I actually had myself, your point about electricity being really, the consumption and its environmental impact being a giant "it depends." I have recently gotten absolutely hooked on looking at our own power grid's generation source and how that changes over the day, because where I live, there's a huge amount of solar and wind, and to my astonishment, around 1 p.m. seems to be the sweet spot for most of the energy I pull off of my wall plugs being green, if you will. Not what I would have expected at all. But do you have any plans to try to track those other phases in this work of energy sources and kind of where those generations and things come from? Or is that just going to be way too complicated to know what data center is producing what, and what is their energy source, and what's the wind like that day, and that kind of thing?
I mean, maybe that would be a valid use for AI if enough people put enough spreadsheets online with the data. I certainly couldn't manage that task.
Okay.
I think the best way to do that is to install solar panels and solar hot water in your home, and you'll find yourself taking showers at the end of the day instead of the beginning of the day, and just that kind of visceral memory. Yeah.
So a lot of people have talked about how both what uses more and Collaborate, how great they would be as teaching tools. Obviously, Collaborate is pretty new and students have been involved in developing it, but I'm curious whether Collaborate has been used in the classroom already to talk about energy use of AI in data centers.
For the first time, we'll be doing it in the next week or two, basically, in some of my own classes, in a computing ethics class, and then class where we're teaching people to build AI agents. I don't want to tip my hand a little bit too much, but there's going to be a lot more coming in the system too.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that's really cool.
Greg and I are hoping to get some distance, like online classes going around this stuff as well. More if we get that off the ground, but that's a little further afield.
I, for one, would love to see if anybody willing to share syllabi or reading lists for this. I think that would be really cool. We are at the end of our hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Everyone, please join me in thanking Jon and Greg and the team for an absolutely amazing presentation. I learned so much during this, and I walk away with more questions than I had before.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. We all need to be talking and asking ourselves all these questions more than we may have been. So it's inspiring to me and everyone to hear that and see everyone's interest too.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming. Sarah, do we have a next month webinar that we can share with in the chat? Or do we not have that scheduled yet? Okay. Yeah, there's a spot to track our next webinars. All right.
I'll also mention that because I promised this group that I would mention it. If for those of you who just can't get enough on AI and the environment, there's actually a panel coming up in the next hour organized by Stony Brook University on AI and the environment. So I just put the link to that in the comments. But I'm also willing to field questions as Greg is, and I'll put my my socials back on the screen here for a moment for anyone who wants to contact me.
So, John, you say that's 1 p.m. today. Is that Eastern time?
Yes, that's right.
So that's is that now? Is that 2 minutes ago?
That's right.
Okay, all right. So immediately, right?
But you know, like it's the more the merrier. And like I said, I'm happy to answer questions right now. Any stragglers or last minute things, that's fine. But
Yep.
anyone who wants to get a second helping can head over to that link.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm happy to leave the meeting open if people have other questions. I of course cannot promise that John and Greg will stick around to answer them. Any thought on nuclear energy in data centers? In is an interesting preposition there.
I think in is a really weird idea, given that part of what you're doing with nuclear energy is trying to get rid of the heat. I mean, this comes up in the space-based data centers, right? And people have this illusion that space is cold. It is actually not cold. Measured by the velocity of particles coming from the sun, it's actually kind of hot. But what makes it seem cold is the lack of density, right? But the lack of sort of air running up against it means there's also no way to radiate the heat easily, and so you have these huge panels that have to do it for you. And I think that's a design principle that these people who are imagining data centers in space have to deal with. Is how would I power this thing and also not compete with the job of getting rid of the heat, which is the whole point of putting them in space to begin with. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it's not something I've specifically researched.
Yeah, I also find myself really not understanding the physics of cooling data centers in space. It does not seem to make sense to me, but we'll see. Can't the heat generated, and I assume this is generally Anuj, be used meaningfully, like if they were in cold places? Couldn't it be used to heat water?
This already exists. There's a startup or a set of people like in Finland that will like basically be like, here, let us put your Bitcoin mining machine like at the edge, like where your radiator is, like drop-in replacement for your radiator. Here it is. It's just going to mine Bitcoins, and that's where all the energy is going to go. So such things people do, and if it's going to be heat, I mean, I have an undergraduate degree in physics, so it might be somehow some less, if most conversion of electricity that is not quote useful unquote turns into heat de facto, but so people try to do stuff like that, but I think it's a complicated question, but a good question. Yeah.
We have a quick question about whether there's a meeting password for the Stony Brook session.
Oh gosh, I saw it referenced on a Google group called AI in Education. Let me see if they put something in there I might have missed.
Sarah says that she thinks you have to register first. Quite possibly they send the password.
That's probably true because I actually did register just in case, and I think that makes sense.
Okay. We've got another question from Anuj Gupta. Who is an actual environmental scientist who specializes in generative AI who you recommend that we should read?
Oh my gosh, that's tough. I don't know if Greg has a suggestion, but I would say that I would say there's no. I would probably. It's hard to find people who aren't on either flabbergasted and frustrated by the lack of information. And Sasha Lucioni is someone who I'd mentioned in that camp. She's a director of sustainability at Hugging Face, which is a sort of an independent AI, kind of think tank. She's probably the most public figure in terms of AI's impact, but she has, as far as I can tell, sort of, slowed down in terms of releasing research studies and ramped up sort of advocacy of like, let's force these companies to be more public with their data, because the best you can do for most of these kind of environmental scientists is load a bunch of open source models on your own, hardware and do some studies based on that. And that's fine. Like, it's helpful, but it's not the scale or the particular model architectures that the big boys are using. So, I guess what I would do is like look through the sources that Sarah has posted in the chat, that are or just go to whatusesmore.com and just look at the sources from there, linked, and just find articles that interest you and then follow those researchers. Unfortunately, I don't have like a go-to person. If you're like a kind of, if you're like a person who thinks that the focus on AI environmentalism is a distraction, Andrew Maisley is a good person to read. If you're a person who thinks that like, oh my gosh, this is really, terrible and it's destroying the planet, there are, I mentioned Rebecca Yeager. There are folks who, let's see, who else? I guess, it's my research on this is born of frustration of not having that person.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's
I mean,
not, it's no one's fault. It's no one's
Yeah,
fault. It's not Sasha
I
Luciani's fault that she can't get access to the data from these companies.
Yeah, I put a link in the chat from Bill Tomlinson, who's their background is a computer scientist doing like sustainability and human computer interaction research for a very long time, one of like the founders of that field. And so, I mean, another one of the perspectives that I think is not as much in John's presentation is there like we are already far beyond, like we haven't done anything that's big enough to address the sustainability and climate crisis at all. Like we're already like hurtling over the edge. Like we're nowhere close. And so, Bill is working on some AI projects, et cetera, and has made some, I would say, somewhat like controversial papers, and there are like issues with them, et cetera, but there's issues with everything. So there is also a community of people that are like, and you can see it from the example I just gave that, our AI use, compared to other things we do is sometimes a lot less than you would think. And that, like maybe it's a distraction, et cetera, but there are also people that are like, well, if we use AI for something and that thing helps us address climate and sustainability issues, like using AI to help like come up with plans or do some advocacy or do something like that around addressing the problem. Like if we used it for that, it has some cost, but what's kind of the benefit? But, cost versus benefits, is always dangerous ground in some ways. Like, is that really beneficial? Is it really as good as you think it is? So yeah, but I put Bill's paper link, a Nature paper on this from a couple of years ago that I think is a really good starting point, though it's and Bill kind of lands on the side of like this could be more efficient for a bunch of stuff for AI to do things, and just from the resource perspective, even if that's not the last analysis for the ethical perspective about how to do that. Sorry for the long answer for me.
No worries. Right, does anyone have any last call for questions? I don't see any hands raised or any such thing. So thank you everyone for coming. This set a record. This had the most attendees of any guest lecture we have ever hosted. And they tend to be pretty popular, but this one was definitely the most popular. And I can't think of a better one for people to see. It was really good. So thanks again, John and Greg and Ethan and the whole team. We really appreciate the work you're doing and especially your willingness to share it with all of us.
Well, Ben and Sarah, thank you for being the sort of persistent, torchbearers for how digital activities affect our society and our ability to, kind of preserve what we care about, whether it's the planet or culture at large.
Thanks. All right. Well, we will see everyone at the next webinar, we hope. Thanks again. And the email with the follow-up links should go out probably on Monday, given the holiday.
Wow. That's fast.
Yes.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Cheers.
Okay.